Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, evening, depending on whether you're joining us from what seems to be Australia and UK at the moment, with some of our European friends also jumping online. Welcome to Pennant's information session on R4i LTS, which is our LSAR to S1000D technology product. My name is Tammy Holter, and I am the Managing Director of Pennant Australia and also the MD of the R4i S1000D software division. Joining me today will be Ms. Rita Nye. Good evening, Rita.
Good evening, Tammy.
So the session today will run for approximately 1 hour. We'll probably do about 45 minutes, 50 minutes, and then have some time for questions at the end. Now, you'll notice we've got a little bit of mixed branding on as we're transitioning. So we have been advertising the webinar as OneStrand along with Pennant and, of course, the R4i brand. So on the 28th of February, Pennant Australasia purchased or acquired Absolute Data Group and the R4i software. And with that came our sister company in the USA, OneStrand Inc. So moving forward, you'll be seeing the Pennant brand along with the R4i S1000D software brand remaining as well. So that's just a little bit of background on why you're seeing some of the mixed brands. Some of the products in our suite. Now, we have an extensive suite of S1000D products. These are the common R4i products that most of our customers use on a day-to-day. So we have the R4i CSTB, or Common Source Database, and that, of course, is used to manage and publish your critical content to IETPs, HTML, and other electronic delivery. The content doesn't have to be in S1000D. We can store legacy formats such as MIL Standard and ATA in SGML or XML. R4i Writer is our powerful XML authoring tool. This tool has been optimized for the S1000D formats, so it comes with all of the XML schemas and style sheets ready for you to automatically start authoring in S1000D. It also comes in a personal edition, so you don't have to be attached to our common source database. R4i Viewer is our royalty-free online and offline IETP viewer for shipping the IETPs that you generate out of our system. And we also have a version for iOS and Android, which is called R4i MobiTP. It also is royalty-free. R4i Binder is our powerful drag and drop tool for creating manuals and handbooks. And although we've listed here, it does that for your S1000D content, we of course also are able to publish any of your SGML and XML content to PDF manuals as well. And in fact, you can mix data. So if you had some legacy MIL Standard, you can mix it with S1000D as long as you generate a style sheet that handles both of the data types. You can publish it all to PDF from R4i Binder. R4i IPD Manager is also a very popular tool with our customers. So it's our illustrated parts data manager tool, and it allows you to generate hundreds of IPD data modules on the fly from engineering parts spreadsheets and databases. So a common one is we have customers that have PLM products, CAD/CAM tools, and they want to utilize those drawings and the parts information that's in that system, and we can generate IPD data for you on the fly. We've also mentioned here we have a product called OneStrand Air. It will be rebadged very soon to R4i Air to not confuse the legacy company names. And it's our hosted platform for our S1000D technology. So if you don't want to install on your site and you'd prefer to be in the cloud with us looking after you, we have a hosted version of all those products as well. So now that the housekeeping is done, let me introduce you to your presenter today, Rita Nye. So Rita has been a senior consultant with Absolute Data Group, OneStrand, and of course now the Pennant Group for 15 years. And she has spent the last 12 years specialising in SGML, XML publishing systems and S1000D and dynamic database publishing projects. And these include delivery to web and complex print requirements. Rita is a trainer, which is obviously why we get her involved in so many of our webinar education sessions, who specialises in S1000D and the R4i product suite. She has a long legacy of working with other XML authoring tools. So apart from being one of the driving forces behind what she would like to see in our R4i Writer tool, she's also worked with products such as Arbortext Editor and Adobe FrameMaker, which our legacy customers have used for many years. Rita, of course, is well known for her style sheet development, which includes both XSLT and her legendary XSL faux development for your complex printed manuals. So on that note, Rita, I would like to hand over to you and I will share your screen.
Excellent.
And I don't.
Too late in the afternoon to be doing this.
Mouse control. It's all with you now. And I'll show you when I can see your screen. You are live, Rita.
Excellent. Okay, so with this, as Tammy said, what we want to do is have a bit of it's going to be a lot of discussion. There's going to be some demo with it. But what we wanted to do was actually discuss LTS, obviously. But we want to also give a bit of an understanding of what we're doing behind the scenes. So R4i LTS is obviously a tool that allows us to get data out of an LSAR and convert it into S1000D. Now, there's a range of different LSAR databases that are available. So we've listed the most common ones here. So we've got obviously the MIL standard 1388. We do have DEFOS 5692, which is the Australian defence variant. We have DefStan 0060 from the UK. Then we've also had the more recent ones, which are the GEIA standard 0007. I keep on going to say 007, but I've got to make sure I say triple. And of course, S3000L from the S series. So what we're looking at is we have this process of being able to collate this data. So first of all, obviously, what we need to be able to do is we need to be able to get the engineering team from the PLM side of it, along with ILS, all looking at the LSAR information. But we've also got to come and incorporate our tech pub team and our training department to all get involved when they start designing and populating their LSAR structure. Because what we need to do is we need to be able to join together. Traditionally, we have this wonderful thing, these wonderful silo walls that everybody lives by themselves. We need to remove those walls. We need to join them all together so that when we start to design and develop our asset information, right from acquisition through to sustainment, through to disposal, we need to make sure that we've got efficient quality data flows processes implemented. So we've got to be able to incorporate everybody into this process. The more we can involve everybody, the better it's going to be. So what we're looking at really is we're going to work on an assumption at this stage until we're told differently, but based on our discussions, there's really 3 stages or 3 phases that we go through with this. So obviously the first phase is our startup. And this is where, again, we get all of these teams together and we have that real discussion as to how we're going to be able to populate the LSAR, what's required from our S1000D's perspective, because remembering from an S1000D's perspective, we're interested in the scope, depth and deliverable requirements for what is the customer expecting when we do this delivery. So what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to start to populate the LSAR database with that relevant information. And if we can, we want to be able to extract that data and possibly put it into some sort of review environment so that we can look at that and see, is it actually going to work? And at some point in time, obviously, we've got to get to a point where we do our first deliverable. And that then means that we're going to get that data out of the LSAR. We're going to put it into our S1000D environment. And with that, a tech writer needs to look at that data. They need to possibly change it from engineer speak and put it into tech pub speak. In addition to that, they've also got to start doing some performance and validation of that data. So they need to be able to go and do things such as a spell check. We need to make sure it's all been written compliant to the relevant language that we're working with. We need to do a Brex check or a business rules exchange check. We also may need to look at it from an STE criteria as well, because we need to make sure that if this content does need to comply to STE, how much of it do we do? And at that point, once all that data has been updated, we've obviously got to generate an IETP. So that's that cycle of first deliverable. And then the next stage to that would be we've delivered that data to our customer, we've got feedback from it, and we may have added extra information. So that then means that we go through that cycle again, and we need to have a way of being able to identify that. So what we're doing is literally looking at that. I've just realised, just going through and looking at this whole process, Tam, out of the slide set that you just showed of all of our products, I'm actually touching on just about all of them. So we're going to have a bit of a speed process happening here.
Bit of a speed
so we'll
show.
See how we go. Just a little bit. So I'm going to be touching on quite a few, as you can just see here. So obviously I'm going to open up LTS first of all, and this is how we can then connect into the the LSAR database. And that's going to start our workflow cycle. Then once I've extracted that data, I'm going to jump into our CSDB and I'm going to import that data. Then I'm going to jump across into R4i Binder so that I can actually generate a PDF, and we're going to use that as an LSAR content review so that we can see what actual information goes into it. Then I'm going to go into R4i Writer, and this is where we can do our update and validation of our content. So this is where we're going to first of all make sure, do we comply to the schema, which hopefully we do because we're hopefully extracting valid data. We can then do our spell check, our STE check, and our Brex check, so we can start to identify that information. And then I'll make a little change to some content just so that I can actually get some updated data. And then I'll jump into Media Gen and generate an IETP and open up that IETP. So as I said, we've got a bit of a jump around to happen with this, so let's hope that it all goes nice and smoothly for me. So the first thing is I want to come into R4i LTS. So what I need to do here, first of all, is I've actually got to select the project. So this is a project that I've got available to me. So I'm connecting into an Amiga PS database here, which is compliant to a 0007 standard. And by selecting the project, what's happening here at this point in time is we're actually retrieving all of the information that has been populated inside the relevant tables of the Amiga PS database. So LTS is actually going in and reading those tables so that it knows what information is available. So that gives us our starting point, because remember, we've had that discussion of you've got the PLM, the ILS, the tech pubs, and the trainers all working together to identify how this information is going to be populated. So then someone, usually from an engineering perspective, would actually go through and start to populate the LSAR with all of this information. So we're retrieving that, and it's almost finished, so hopefully we'll be able to go from there. And what we want to be able to do is once we've retrieved it, that's when we can then start to say, okay, what data do we want to produce? So that's where we get to have a lot of our controls with that information.
So Rita, you mentioned you're heading a 0007 database, and this one happens to be in Canada at the moment, right? So you're actually going from Australia to Canada but via a GoToMeeting, which I'm sure is routing you technically via the US into Canada. So this it does slow things down a little because we do use a lot of bandwidth for the GoToMeeting demonstration of the screen. But it's actually relatively quick, all things considered, when we're going all the way from Australia into Canada to grab all the data. So
normally with this, takes about 2 minutes to be able to retrieve it when I don't have a go-to-meeting
Session
involved.
Yep, yep.
But I thought it was beneficial for people to actually see that we're actually pulling the data from the relevant tables.
Yeah, it's a live demo.
So you can actually see it. There we go. So we've been able to collate and retrieve all that information. So now this is where we start to make some decisions from a TechPub's perspective. The first one is, what version of the spec do we need this data to be written out as? And from an LTS perspective, we support issue 4 all the way through to issue 5. So again, we can choose, and we've got all of the patch versions as well. So we can choose which one it is that we want. So from this perspective, I'm actually going to choose 4.2 just for a change. I've been doing 5 quite a bit now, so I may as well use 4.2. Next is our choice of data module types that we actually want to extract from the LSAR. Now, obviously, this is where we're going to have a fair bit of discussion and identification of what data. And you can see here that I can choose procedural, IPD, and CIR data. So I can choose all. I could just choose, say, procedural and CIR. I could just do procedural. Depending on what my choices are, will determine what happens with that. I'm going to extract all of it for today, but we've got that choice. We've also got the choice of what do we want to export illustrations. Now, storage of illustrations inside an LSAR, it's a project choice. They can, they may not. They may just do a reference to a graphic, but if there are, we do have the capabilities to be able to extract them.
So this is another project kind of decision and debate, isn't it, Rita? Because some people sort of say,
absolutely,
well, you know, we're doing it in the PLM and you could like extract it straight from the PLM with IPD Manager, you know, into the CSDB. So why would we, you know, fill up the LSAR database with the images as well? And so again, it's all about choices, and so hence the options on and off. And I just wanted to highlight there too, Rita, that so the last type of data module that we're looking to add to that list as being a potential to be extracted from the LSAR is the schedules. Is that right? That's the latest.
Correct.
Yep. Okay. Excellent.
Yep. Okay. So I'm not going to extract the illustrations. I've actually already extracted them, so I'm going to leave those alone. It does take a little bit longer because obviously some of the illustrations could be quite large. So for this particular situation, I'm not going to extract the illustrations. And obviously I have an output location. So once I've done all of that, I do the really hard part, which is actually click on Run Extraction. And by doing that, what it does is actually now pulls that data out, and it's producing that data into data modules. Bang, there we go. It's now produced 18 data modules that we've got. Now, obviously, the top 3 are CIRs. Of course, I know that because I'm looking at them and I know the info codes. So, but when you start to work with it, you obviously know that. We can see here we've got a procedural one, and if I quickly open that up, you can see here that it has created it as a 4.2 procedural. And if I scroll down through it, you'd see I have all of the information for that particular procedure being populated into the data module. So what we want to be able to do here is we want to be able to now add this data into our CSDB. And so with that, I'm going to jump into our CSDB client. And with this, in my repository, I have a folder here that I've just called LTS. I'm just going to add it into that. So all I'm going to do is just go to right click and add. And I'll just point back to where my LTS is. And I'm just going to select all of the data modules. I want to add all of these in, and I can then go open. And it's listed all 18, so I'm just going to say add. Now you can see here I've got a checkbox here for publish files. Traditionally, by getting data out of an LSAR, you wouldn't automatically publish that data. You'd want to do a little bit of a check with it before you actually go through to publish. So I'm going to do really bad, and I'm actually going to publish it straight away. So I literally want to add this and publish it at the same time. So during this process, it's actually interrogating the data. So it's looking inside the data, it's verifying if it's well formed, It's also retrieving information such as, does it have any illustrations associated with it? Are there any references to other data modules? It's actually building all of that knowledge base as we add this data into the CSDB. So it's not just going through and just adding it, it's actually interrogating it as we do so. So it does give us a little bit of extra function. And the fact that I'm getting my green lines means it's actually processing each one of these, and I'm not getting any error messages, which means that my data is well formed. And there we go. On completion, it's showing me that it's added 18 files. It's been able to publish all 18 as well. It's also identified 59 illustrations have been registered, and I've got 2 data module references registered as well. So by going through that whole process, it's been able to validate that information. And if I go OK, here's my data. And obviously, I don't want to have a look at my CIRs. I actually want to go down to some of the content. And the very first one, which is the same one that I was just looking at in Notepad, here it is here. And we can see that it's got 3 illustrations referenced, and it's got a data module reference as well. So it's been able to identify all of that information, and inside the repository, I can now see that. So let's say we now want to do a technical content review. So with that, we've got a couple choices. We could go and generate an ITP, or we could generate a PDF. For this scenario, I'm actually going to generate a PDF. So I'm just going to jump into R4i Binder. And obviously, I've just added this data into my CSDB. So we can see here that my LTS folder is actually empty. So I'm just going to do a quick refresh. And with this, what I want it to be able to do is grab this data. So there we go. We've now got our files in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag this across and put it into my book structure. And for this scenario, I'm not going to keep the CIRs. I'm actually going to remove those. So I just want the procedural and IPD data. Now, by doing nothing else at all, I can literally come in here and go create HTML PDF. And what it does at this point is it's going to convert those XML files into HTML, and from there it's then going to produce them into a PDF. The benefit of doing this is you can get one complete publication that has all of the data modules. So instead of having to produce individual PDFs for each of these, I can produce a book and get that content to come through.
So this reader is not what we class as a traditional book with a cover page and TOC and figures and stuff. This is like you said, really what you're doing is batch printing an individual data module, and it's one of the things that we had a lot of customers, they, as you said, want to do a fast content review, and in this case it's specifically to do a fast review of the engineering data that's coming out of the LSAR. And so
Correct.
What we're wanting to do is, instead of going, okay, give me a preview of that data module, now PDF it, give me a preview of that data module and let's PDF it, you've basically dragged and dropped the entire set of data that's been extracted from the LSAR and said, PDF it. And it will be one PDF with individual data modules inside it for people to be able to review the engineering data, right?
Correct, that's it. So you can see there, because of the GoToMeeting process and such, it's taking a little bit longer than normal. The HTML PDF process is a little bit slower than a traditional publication because it's got to transform it to HTML first. But still at a minute 19, it's still not too bad. And if I open that PDF up, and I'll just bring that across. So what that's done, and of course I could have reordered this content into any order that I wanted to, but I haven't. I've just literally just grabbed it across and pulled it over. I have got bookmarks, so every data module has been listed in the bookmarks, so the process will do that. But what it's done is it's produced a publication or a PDF of the individual data modules. So we can see here's some IPD data, and we can see here's that particular data module that I was just looking at, that procedural data module. So again, it's putting all of the content in as we would expect it to display, and we can see the data then rolls over and shows the information. And because I've got illustrations associated with this, the illustrations are then actually appended at the bottom of that data module, and then I get to the next one. So this is where, from a review process, we could review this information and capture the data that we're interested in. So it gives us that way of being able to collect and collate that information to get it into that first cycle. So let's say we're kind of happy. Yep, all of the teams have accepted and adopted and said, yes, this is what we're going to do. This is the correct SNS structure that we're working with. So we can see all of our data module codes are up here. We've agreed to all of that. So what we want to do now is we want to convert this information. We want to review it and make the technical updates that a tech doc team would do. So to do that, let me just close this PDF. I'll jump into R4i Writer. And again, because I'm already inside Writer, I'm just going to do a quick refresh to make sure that I've got the latest data. And if I come down into my LTS folder, again, we can see that same information. So let's come into, we'll keep on picking on this procedural data module. And with this procedural data module, if I just format it so I can view it a little bit easier, I can see all of the data that's been populated into the ID status block. And here we come into our data module, into the content section. Now I'm not going to worry about, I'm not going to change anything that's inside our preliminary requirements, but we can see here's our procedural information. Now what we could do is, obviously, if we look at this information and if we look at the actual power of content that's there, I know this has been written by the engineers, but the logic is if we start to read the content that's there, is it really one step, or should it actually be broken up into multiple steps? Let's say from a TechPub's perspective, we actually want to break that into 3 individual steps instead of one step. So what we can do is we could then add a procedural step. Let's just do it the traditional way.
Now, of course, Rita, this request could go back to engineering to do that in the LSAR if they wanted and go through that change process. Or
absolutely.
It might be that, no, we're just going to enhance it over here on the authoring side of the house. And this is, again, you know, one of those workflow process, business rules, you know, how are the teams working together and you know, how's that going to work? So there's various options for, you know, this particular scenario. We've even had some customers recently ask us, oh, we'd also like to see, seeing you made the change here, that you push it back to the LSAR. We also have some customers who say there's not a chance we would ever push content from a CSTB back to an LSAR. It should go back through that proper change cycle and be done in the LSAR back to the CSTB. So, you know, different customers have different opinions on it, and so, you know, we're trying to give as many options and interfaces and choices for how you might approach that.
Absolutely, that's all we're trying to do, just show the processes that could be available, and obviously each individual organisation will make their own decisions about that. Mm-hmm. So if I save this, I can actually preview it.
And this is my favourite view. You get to see what it's going to look like when you publish it to an IETP.
Okay, so again, you can see how that information is coming through. So at least we can see now we've changed it from 1 step down to 3 steps. Again, as to how that gets done, that's project decision. But obviously at this point in time, we need to start doing some other things that we need to consider. So first of all, if we look down at our document errors, we're joyfully showing there that we've got 0 errors. So now that means that from a schema perspective, we're valid. which is nice. There's 0 errors on the schema. We can also see that there are 0 errors on the spelling. So that's our first 2 checks. Without doing anything else, we've been able to do that. Now, obviously, from a spell checks perspective, whatever is the language that we have put into here, that's going to be what we're doing our spell check on. So if you've had different people working inside the LSAR, and because we can, we've got Americans, we've got Canadians, we've got Australians, we've got people from England. We all have our own spell checks. We all have our own ways of writing content. So therefore, if we had different engineers that came from all of those different countries, they may have loaded data with their own spelling. So we could have put some Australian English into the LSAR, which means when it comes out, if we've specified that it's to be US English, then it's going to highlight that we've got Australian English, so you'd be able to then fix that. So we do get that side of it. What we need to do is we then need to consider, do we need to do an STE check? And obviously, do we need to do a Brex check? So for our STE check, what we can do is we can click onto our little check STE. And what that will do is it'll actually go through our content. And now suddenly I've got 9 errors, which is not necessarily what I want, 7 errors. But it's listed all of those errors inside my STE errors tab. And in addition to being able to see it here, I can also come into the document, and if I point to the actual word, you can see it's got a red squiggle line underneath it. It'll actually come up and tell you what is the error. So again, you would look at this, you would identify how would you need to reword the sentence so that it could then be a little bit more STE compliant.
So Rita, just because I think we've got a few people in the room that have probably not attended some of our sessions of the past, so STE is of course simplified technical English, and
yes it is.
And the goal of that is to, as it says, simplify technical words. And so procedures are a classic example where we have engineers and people who know a complex topic, and they can make their words sometimes a little too technical for the maintainer who's going to use that information in the field. And depending on what service you're writing for, so whether and the country as well, sometimes they expect you to write procedures for as low as a 13-year-old reading ability. And so
Correct.
We really have to simplify those procedures and steps to be very clear and concise. And as you've got there, the word amount is like, oh, okay, so the context that you've used it in, here's the unapproved example, and then some suggestions on what you might want to replace that option with. So that's the benefit. And ST is, of course, yet another one of the S series specifications, which we tend to work with. So like we saw, S3000L is one of the database types for Amiga. We've got S1000D for, of course, our product suite. And then we have STE is, of course, yet another item that's used in that range of S-series products for just, bringing data together well, making it consistent, making it compliant, making it flow through the entire business. And as we said, all the way out to training, we can actually, from Binder, we can publish out to SCORM for e-learning as well. So the same procedures can be reused with additional learning modules over in the training environment as well. And that's the aim of the game, right, is to get that flow of information from start to finish.
Absolutely. Yep. Okay. So again, we could go through, we could reword this. So, fill the tank until a small amount of oil spills out of the oil filling opening or fill opening. It's not the best way to write it. So, you'd really want to be able to reuse and identify how much you're expecting for that to come out. So you can then rewrite that content. So we can do our STE check, And of course, obviously, one of the big ones that we want to be able to do is a Brex check, or a business rules exchange check. So with that, what we want to be able to do is, obviously, we have our business rules, which are the human readable portion. Our business rules exchange is the programmatic verification of that information. So what you want is for the software to actually guide you with that. So with that, up in our toolbar, we actually have a Brex check. And if I click onto that, what it's going to do is it's going to validate against the business rules exchange data module that you have referenced to that data. So again, it's going through, and now you can see I've now got 12 errors inside my document, and I've got all these wonderful red lines everywhere. And if I point to my errors, what it does is it actually shows me what the information is. So you can see here, if I look at this particular one here, I can actually go to it. And of course, it's in my preliminary requirements. So when I point to it, it's actually showing me what the information is, and I can see what's the error. So it's not happy with how that information has been written. So this is, again, where we're going through and we're putting in the details of what has been agreed between you and your customer for how you're going to write this data. So it lets us give that modification and understanding. So this is where we can do the programmatic verification of that data. So obviously what we should do is actually go through and fix this all up so that it has everything correct. And then once we've done that, then we would be able to do another Brex validation and we would check it in. I'm going to be a little bit lazy in that I'm not going to do any modification. I'm going to leave it as it is. So now what I want to do is I want to be able to check that into my database. I'm going to be very naughty. You wouldn't normally publish at this point in time. You would actually get it to go through a QA process first.
Yep.
I'm just going to check it in.
You just keep publishing everything.
I just publish everything. Why not? Okay, and during that publish process or check-in process, again, it's verified that the data module is well formed, which we know it is because it did tell us that. It's also published it, which means that it's also valid. It's also registered the 3 illustrations that are inside this data module, plus the 1 data module reference that we have. So again, it's gone through that process of identifying that information. So if I go OK, my data module will then get closed, and inside my CSDB, if I jump back into that, and again, if I do a refresh, we can see here's that data module, and my internal version number has been incremented, so I haven't touched the issue number. You can see here the issue number is still set to 000, but the internal version number has changed, and that's purely because it's identified that that content has been physically changed, so the internal version number gets incremented. So obviously, let's now pretend we're at the point where we want to do a first deliverable. So therefore, what we need to do is we need to be able to generate an IETP. So I jump into my Create IETP tool, which is part of the CSDB interface. And with this, what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to build an actual IETP of just this data. So what I've got is my media gen window. And with this, I obviously give it a name and an output location. Where do I want to physically write it to? I can choose what type of IETP do I want to generate. And obviously for this, I want to use R4i Viewer. So I can choose that. I can then come into my info sets and I can navigate down to where my LTS folder is, and I can see all of my data modules here. So I can just drag them straight over and incorporate those. Don't know how I did that one, but I managed to get. Okay, it's thinking because I seem to have managed to add the whole repository.
You tried to add the whole repository, didn't you?
I didn't intentionally mean to do it. Okay, in addition to that, I can start doing some customization. So I can put in a splash, a banner, a cover, a disclaimer. I could do a range of different customizations. I'm not going to do that with this session. I literally just want to be able to build an IETP. In addition, I have even more preferences that I can go through and do customizations with. And I can then jump to my Progress tab and I can click on Start. Now I'm writing out to a default directory that I always use, so yes, I'm going to delete it. And now it's actually generating that IETP. And you can see I'm getting a couple of error messages or warning messages. So that's where I have got content that's been referenced but hasn't been included. So I'd obviously want to be able to fix that up before I go too far. And if I open that output directory, if I double click onto this sample.R4i, if I double click onto that, what's going to happen is my IETP is going to launch. So I'll just wait for that to come up. And it's going to then load onto my screen, and I'll then be able to see that data inside my IETP. So here we are. Here's our content. Now, since I've been picking on the procedural data, let's continue to pick on that. So if I open that particular data module up, what we'll be able to see is all of the changes of the content that we put into it. So if we scroll down, we can see here's all of our data that we saw whilst I was doing the quick preview. And we can see here that I've got my 3 steps all listed. So again, it's populated with that information. So this is how we can then go through that process of being able to issue this to our customer. Obviously, from a deliverables perspective, before we actually issue this, we'd want to do some checking such as link validation to make sure that we've incorporated all of the data. But there may be other things that we want to check. We want to make sure, have we customized it correctly and such. So we'd go through and do all of that. And we can see here I've got some illustrations, so I can actually split the screen and see those illustrations. So I can actually view and identify all of the different illustrations. And if the reference was displaying to another data module, I could click onto that and I could actually navigate to that data module as well. So it gives me that capability to be able to display that data from end to end. So that's the sort of process that we've got at this particular point in time.
So Rita, just keeping that data module up for a second. Sorry to do that to you.
Sorry. That's okay.
So just there, perfect. Because so I noticed the estimated time for this task, was the 0.5 minute, which was, of course, was brought up in the Brex check. It was one of the items the Brex check picked up, right? Because it expected the time to be in hours. And I guess this brings us to the classic, like you said. Now, the Brex is a computer readable, hence writer uses it, validation that will programmatically pick up data that's incorrect. But of course, the business rules that are basically the human readable version of those would explain things like that in human readable form, so that the technical authors also know, just by reading the documents, the standards that are being implemented into the documentation and the rules that are being implemented. So I guess one of the things we could say there is, so do we need to be sharing the business rules with the engineers as well, so that that data they never would have entered that half a minute was an adequate value that could be put in the LSAR. And of course, some might say, no, don't worry about it. They don't need to get involved in business rules. And that's okay, as long as you do have a tool for the authors later during their quality checks, and of course the QA team again behind the authors, that they've got tools like Brex Check to help pick up those types of things, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it was just a very interesting exercise, because, you sort of think, I wonder, what's the value issue? Yes, okay, yeah, half a minute. Pretty sure that's in any technical task that's never going to happen. It'll be in hours. So, so it's just interesting to see that you've got that backup. If you've got the right tools with things that have got ability like ours that we've got Brex checking and STE checking, you can really lock down and drill down on some of this stuff, which is fantastic.
Okay. Correct, and everybody should have very detailed business rules anyway. So
Absolutely.
when you start a project.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And the Brex check is just that, that very fast validation and very clear, concise and programmatic, and that final checkpoint can be done with software, which is, always your backup plan, right, to the final piece. But, there's some things that we don't check as well in Brex that can only be human checks and guidance, and hence that's why business rules get written first. And then what falls out of that is what rules can we check with the computers, and so that's when you then get your Brex.
Yep,
so
absolutely.
Excellent.
Yep. So that's the sort of process that we're looking at. So you can see with that, we've literally gone through that whole process, which then of course means, does anybody have any questions? So whilst they're thinking about that, we then really do have what happens next, because when you get to that point of you've issued data, if any of that has to be changed, how do we do that? And that's sort of where we're kind of sitting at the moment. We don't necessarily have...
Yeah, we're discussing this with customers right now.
Discussions, yes. Yeah. As to how that's all going to fall. Because obviously we don't want to generate an update, export it out from the LSAR via LTS and just automatically add it into the CSDB, because that's going to overwrite the tech writer's content.
Yep.
And it's a lot of pain to get that back into the tech writer format.
Yep.
It's doable, but it's not the most comfortable way to do it.
And certainly our view, and I think most customers seem to be of the same opinion, that once you've kind of done that initial build of the data from the LSAR, it's best to just be notified of updates. So we have a linking or association of the data module code into the LSAR, and so then if there's an update in the LSAR, we get informed that this data module or these data modules potentially have been affected or updated, and what changed that caused that, and whether that's a part number or they added a new step or whatever they might have done. That's basically, we need the details of what's been updated in the LSAR, and then the author would look at their current version of their content, which has been massaged, Brex checked, STE checked, and they would take a look at what the change is and make that change moving forward. And that seems to be, I think, the general opinion from most of the customers on how they'd like to see the next generation of LTS is we have an update, a push update that basically informs the authors daily of what's changed. So that's what we're heading for, or what we're contemplating at this particular point in time. The next edition, exactly. That's right.
Next gen, correct.
Now, of course, Rita, as always, the question of, you had an IPD displaying there earlier, and IPDs are very popular. They're always the hot topic of data. So can we take a look at a IPD with hotspotting in it? It's always the hot topic, isn't it? Can we have the hotspot from images to data? So if you want to grab one of your data modules that has an image, and of course it starts with the image. The image has to be prepared with hotspots on it. And one of the very cute features of R4i Writer is if you import an image with hotspots on it, it will actually highlight to the authors the hotspots. So when they're authoring text, they can actually point to the hotspots from text to image. And then when we publish to an IATP, like you have here, this is the type of functionality that we then get, which is amazing. So
this is some customer data. And so with this, I can point to the hotspot in the illustration, and you can see that the hotspot is highlighted inside the table. And you can see we've got a red border on that hotspot in the illustration. If I point to the content in the table, it actually points to the hotspot in the graphic. And we're smart enough, we choose different colours for those so that they can see which one has been highlighted by which. So we can have that traditional function. We can also have the linking to go and drill down into the content. And traditionally these illustrations open, but for whatever reason they're not today. So again, I can drill down because, of course, this is a CGM, so I can zoom quite nicely to be able to see that data. And I can continue to drill down. And with this, what I end up with, I can have pop-ups if I want, but what I end up with is a cookie trail down the bottom. So that means I can easily navigate backwards and forwards with this content, and it makes it much easier for us to be able to do that. I could also drill down to a PDF as well. So you're not just restricted to going from data module to data module. You could do data module to PDF. You could do illustration to illustration if you wanted to. It really depends on how you've designed and developed your CGMs from that perspective, or SVGs, so that we can have that manipulation of data.
And Rita, you've got a shopping cart in this one as well, right? Which happens to be, so the shopping cart process works with, we basically use our CDMS technology, and you can do a parts lookup or a parts ordering, depending on how they want to configure it, back to your systems such as SAP, etc. So we need a layer. We've got another tool called CDMS, and it talks. It's the talking layer between the viewer and the product, the database at the other end, such as SAP, where you can interrogate and do the lookup. And these are all just options. So it just depends on what capability that you do want to deliver to the end customer, what their expectations are, what they've asked for, what they've paid for. But this is the type of thing that you can basically deliver, and the IPDs are often a very popular start point for where do we start with the information. I wanted to go to the highest level drawing, and I want to drill down, and then I want to go to data modules and PDFs and other information that's associated with that component. So it's and pretty popular.
Have some very simple IPD, or you can have some really complex IPD. This one happens to be quite a simple IPD, but others can be really complex, and it can have a lot of extra information that is not necessarily required for all customers. So that's why you start to look at IPD, and there's a lot of variation and a lot of flexibility that occurs with those.
For what information they want in the table in particular, right, Rita? Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Excellent.
Okay,
well, I don't think we have any other questions tonight, but if you do think of something as you exit, Rita and my emails are both up on the screen there. And as you leave us today, there'll be a web page that will pop up where you can also give us feedback on what you thought of today's webinar. It will give you the opportunity to put your details in if you'd like more information on any of the R4i products or on the Amiga PS product as well. So on that note, thank you everyone for attending, for coming in early from UK and Europe, and for those of you who stayed back with us this evening from Australia. We look forward to talking to you again very, very soon. Thank you everyone. Thank you, Rita.
Thank you.